A cool thing about this series for me is that I can use it as an excuse to get into some shows I have never seen before. With some of these, my plan is to watch just a few episodes and then cover it with a guest who's more familiar with the show. For other shows, I'll watch the entire thing. In this volume of TV show movies, I took my first look at Mystery Science Theater 3000 and Venture Bros. Mystery Science Theater is a funny riff comedy series where we're essentially just watching people make jokes while watching movies, so I really only felt the need to watch a handful of episodes. Some of the best the show has to offer, at least according to my friend Matt, who will be dropping by later to give some of his thoughts as a fan of the show. Venture Bros, on the other hand, has a movie that was essentially a conclusion to the entire series, so I wanted to give it a full watch. And I'm glad I did, because let me just say, it's one of my favorite shows of all time now, possibly my favorite Adult Swim show period, and there has been some major competition for that title. Guest appearances won't be exclusive to shows I'm not familiar with. Mitzi joined me for the Steven Universe movie last volume, and we had both seen the entire show, but it will be a helpful way to cover all of the requests I'm getting. With that being said, let's start volume 4 off with... Alright, so like I just said, I've actually never seen the show prior to making this video. The episodes that Matt suggested were Santa Claus Conquers the Martians, Santa Claus Doesn't Conquer the Martians, and Manos, The Hands of Fate. And I have to say, after watching those and the movie, this show really isn't for me. I do like a good movie riff, but I think I prefer what shows like Adam and Pals do, where you're really only seeing the highlights rather than a riff of the entire / most of the movie. I also like it when these highly edited riffs can start having a discussion, or a bit that goes on for like a minute or two, while Mystery Science Theater mainly seems to make a quick joke and move on. But it's just not something I can watch for that long without getting a little bored of it. Hell, when Matt and I do riffs, which we have done quite a lot of, we always do trim the fat. With Mystery Science Theater, I found myself enjoying the skits more than the actual movie riffs. I like these characters, they are funny, and I like the way that the robots are designed. They look cheap, but it fits in with the show, like these guys are all inventors, and yet our main guy is stuck with these two. It works, and I get the appeal of the show a lot. I even really like how they present the movie riffs, where you always see their silhouettes watching the movies. It's just not my thing. And when it comes to the film, it just kind of feels like more of the same. I don't have a lot to say about the film that I couldn't also say about the show. There is an upgrade in production, the sets look nicer, the camera they filmed with is obviously higher quality. It is an overall more polished version of the show, but you don't really need that. The cheapness of Mystery Science Theater worked aesthetically. I don't even really get why you would adapt this show into a movie. Like the Impractical Jokers movie, it's not really a format that demands a movie, but unlike the Impractical Jokers movie, it understands what the appeal of the show is, so we don't get a bunch of pointless scenes we don't need. The live action skits are also part of the show, and the movie doesn't really hold on to them any longer than the show did, so if you like the show, I can't see any reason why you wouldn't like the movie. Other than having to pay for it, I guess. Which is still true, by the way. I was able to find every episode I wanted to watch on YouTube. The movie, I had to rent. The movie they chose to watch for this movie was called This Island Earth, and I don't even really get why they picked this one. There's nothing really all that stand out about it. At least when James Rolfe did a movie for the angry video game nerd, he made The Focus his most requested game. I honestly found This Island Earth boring, and the riff wasn't much better. The interactions they made for Cal and Joe got a couple laughs from me. I definitely enjoyed the episodes I watched more than the movie. Sorry to all fans of the show who are disappointed with my reaction to it. So you know what, let's just hand it off to someone who actually is a fan of the show.
So, Mystery Science Theater 3000, the movie, is basically the worst episode of MST3K. I mean, this is a show whose standard episode length is longer than the movie. And since it's a movie, they have to spend a lot of time re-establishing the characters and concept of the series rather than immediately jumping into a bit like the show does. I don't even think they do a very good job of this. The scene of Dr. Forrester making them bow down and worship him always felt weird and out of character. Plus, they really went all out with the sets, and while I guess it's nice to see parts of the ship we didn't get to previously, like Crow's room, I would still consider this a detriment to the film. There's something charming about those homemade sets on the show that the film kinda ruins by trying to go bigger and grander, which I think really highlights that MST3K is really not a show that needs to have a movie. When you see these guys on cable dicking around on a cheap set, it feels like you're watching some friends sitting down and joking through a lame movie. But now you expect me to go to the Cineplex and pay to see some guys in a slick 90s comedy make fun of an earnest piece of film from the 1950s? It just feels like punching down in a way the show never was. Certainly doesn't help that they picked a fairly respected movie like This Island Earth to riff. This has to be one of the best movies they ever watched. Not the best, that's probably Danger Diabolique, a fun, colorful James Bond knockoff, but this is up there. Okay, so I don't like the wraparounds and I'm not huge on the movie selection, but it's the MST3K guys, surely they still have funny riffs, right? Well, yes, the riffs are easily the best part of the show, but would you believe me if I said they found a way to fuck that up too? Turns out the studio asked them to put fewer jokes in the movie so audiences would have more time to laugh. What is even the point at this point? What's worse, this definitely hampers a bit more of the show's charm, as it was definitely the more obscure jokes that got cut. I like what Homestar Runner creator Matt Chapman said about MST3K. Quote, I feel like they were always dropping either references to a joke they had already made that was totally exclusive to the show, or making some weird reference to a commercial from the late 70s or something that they knew only about 10 people were gonna get, but they made that joke anyway, so it was sort of like, this is for you 10 dudes who are gonna like this joke. I thought that was very cool. End quote. And that's mostly absent from this movie. If you're a fan of the show, I would say to check out the film. It's a massive downgrade, but it's not awful anything. If you're not familiar with the show, though, this is a pretty bad entry point. Monster A Go-Go is probably a good introduction to the characters, and I'm a big fan of the two Christmas episodes, Santa Claus and Santa Claus Conquers the Martians, so those are my recommendations. And just off the top of my head, Ega, Manos, Daddy-O, and Hobgoblins are all pretty fun. Back to you, Spiny.
Here we have yet another series that doesn't necessarily warrant a movie. The Angry Video Game Nerd is a comedy review show about an angry nerd playing some really old and uncharitable video games. However, this isn't really all that uncommon for reviewers. A lot of people who focus on making videos discussing art often get the urge to make said art. Okay, there is an art to making a thoughtful or comedic discussion, I'd be a pretty huge hypocrite to deny that, but you know what I mean. Something with character, something with a story. We've seen this countless times with the Cinema Snob movie, the Atop the Fourth Wall movie. If you count those Nostalgia Critic Anniversary specials, sure, there's like 3 of those that you could count as movies. Even Scott the Woz's Borderline Forever feels like a film adaptation of the show, even if it doesn't call itself that. It's got an original score, a majority of the video is more focused on the live action aspects of the show. There's original songs, it has a poster that damn sure looks like a movie poster. A lot of these online critics want to take a shot at doing a film version of their show, and I'd say out of all of the ones I've seen, Borderline Forever is really the only one that feels true to the original source material. Scott the Woz is a show that already had multiple episodes that were purely just comedy sketches. Good comedy sketches in my opinion. So the live action portions of Borderline Forever feel right at home, but it was also very clever to allow the first 20 to 30 minutes play out like a regular Scott the Woz video, talking about Nintendo games, before it turns into a little short film about Scott realizing there's been a blue border around him his entire life, and him trying to find out why that is. It's such a silly concept for a story, but it actually does have something to say, with regular episodes of Scott the Woz being breakdowns of various video games or gaming topics. This special episode is a breakdown of Scott's show itself. I think it's actually a really funny and clever video that I would recommend to people even if they aren't that familiar with the show. Being familiar would make you enjoy it better, but Borderline Forever was legitimately my introduction to his channel and it helped me become a fan. And now on rewatches I get so many more of the running gags that they have in it. I think the reason Borderline Forever works is it just understands what it needs to be. It understands its relevance to the actual show. The Angry Video Game Nerd movie approach is nearly 2 hours of an adventure movie, followed by a 9-minute review of E.T. during the credits. The Angry Video Game Nerd show definitely had skits in them, but not only were they usually smaller additions to his videos making this film's focus feel a little out of place, but this movie also doesn't really bring back a lot of Angry Video Game Nerd characters. It's mainly an original cast, which, fair enough, it's not like the nerd episodes had tons of reoccurring characters, or characters that could carry a movie. The characters in Borderline Forever were guys who've been featured on the channel on a somewhat frequent basis. But I don't think this movie is an accurate portrayal of the show simply because it's going for something far different from what the show is. That, however, doesn't mean it doesn't represent the show at all, as a big part of this film is showing appreciation to its fans that let him get this far, up to the point where they are present during the movie, whether it be through webcam cameos or them physically showing up to certain filming days. This movie kind of is a big thank you to everyone who's been watching his show, with the most requested game for him being the big reward at the end of it. So how does it hold up as a film? I don't hate it as much as other people do, but I still don't think it's very good. Let's start with some positives, though. I actually think there's kind of a lot of them. The way James incorporated the game E.T. into the plot was very effective, using both the fact that it's his most requested game and that there's a weird history behind the game, to his advantage. You know, there was a myth about a bunch of copies being buried in the desert, which turned out to be completely true a few years after this movie was released. I think them going to try to find the games in the desert, but then Area 51 overhearing them, thinking that they're looking for actual extraterrestrial, not a game called E.T. was a clever way to move the story forward. But then as the movie goes on, it turns out the game E.T. actually is involved with real Area 51 secrets and real extraterrestrial life. I think this is a solid way to write a story around this game. The nerd isn't this big action hero, so making the circumstances of his adventure being completely accidental works. Getting people who were involved in making the game appear in the movie was a nice touch. Giving both a real and fake history lesson about this game was a fun idea. It's a movie with a few things going for it. Hell, I actually like the score a decent bit. There's a track called Maverick Regeneration that they use for the trailer, and honestly, it kinda slaps.
Nerds before birds. Something tells me you're not just some gamer, but the gamer.
There's another track called Birds Before Nerds that starts off relatively relaxed, before building into this grand reprise of the angry video game nerds theme. And not only do I think it sounds nice, I think its use in the movie is not only cool, but weirdly touching. It's this moment where the nerd is finally going to review this game people have wanted him to cover for years, and he's going to do it out in the desert with the game being projected from an alien saucer with all of his fans watching, and it's a pretty solid moment in this movie. I like it. I think one of the biggest critiques I heard of this movie is the production wasn't very good. The entire thing looks cheap, and there's nothing wrong with not liking that, but I do think you at least need to acknowledge it's very intentional. James has made it pretty clear that he's a fan of these old cheesy B movies, and he made a lot of them growing up, and yeah, these bad effects look like that on purpose. It's a homage to old cinema. Even smaller decisions like them green screening the car rides instead of them just filming themselves driving. It would have been easier to just film themselves driving. They went out of their way to make it look worse. I personally see what he was going for, and I do find it kind of charming, but there's no shame in not being a fan of this film's presentation, and even though a lot of it is intentional, it's not like they executed this flawlessly. There are scenes that just look so bad that I can't even really give it that pass. That one cat fight scene near the end of the movie looks especially bad in my opinion. But I do think it's cool they built these giant building props, that they had this weird metal demon character destroy. I like that they have mini versions of bigger props like the nerd's van or a rocket so they can do some practical effects with those. Yeah, they aren't fooling me. I can tell very easily I am looking at a toy right now, but again, no one working on this expected anything different from you. I would at least be very surprised if that wasn't the case. I mean, it sounds like I'm praising this movie a lot, so how the hell can I say I don't like it? Well, I think the characters and dialogue are genuinely terrible. I like the nerd in this just fine. I do prefer him on the show, of course, but he works fine as a protagonist here. I like that the angry part of his name is true and he isn't just a prick throughout the film. He's actually really caring of his fans and colleagues in this movie. He's not an unlikable protagonist or anything. It's just when it comes to bad games, yeah, it pisses him off. His two buddies that travel with him throughout the movie aren't anything that spectacular. I don't really hate either of them, but I also don't care to see either of them again. I haven't seen every episode of The Nerd Show, but I'm just about certain this is a first appearance for both of them. But then with everyone else, man, is this just an obnoxious movie. It's trying really hard. It has characters shouting shit nonstop and tries to make everyone as terrible and disgusting as possible, and it just doesn't make me laugh the first time, and it doesn't make me laugh the 80th time either.
And because you're the fucking expert, I was fucking wondering, just off the top of my head, do you think we should put it in the front display?
God, where's my fucking arm?
Eat lead, you FBI scum!
What the hell are all these fucking boxes doing here?
Bullshit! That's going in the front display.
There are so few jokes in this movie that land, and some of them are just downright infuriating.
Even my dreams are low budget.
Now, I thought I could get through this without objectifying myself in a sexy catfight. But it looks like that's impossible now.
Yeah, we're acknowledging the film is bad, so you can't call it bad jokes. My favorite. Don't comment on how bad the movie looks. If you want to commit to the style, just own it. You are not into an audience that is not nodding back. So many fans felt the same way about this movie when it came out. I swear some of them turned on the show because of how much they hated it. And I'm sure there are fans out there who like it too. And you know what? That's great. I do think I listed enough good things about it where I could personally understand why someone would overlook certain things about it. But I just can't get past the way these characters are written. It brings the entire movie down with it. I was at Too Many Games this year, and since this movie is turning 10 years old this year, they were doing a special screening of it in one of the rooms. I went in to check it out for about 10 minutes, and the room was full. A lot of people showed up for this thing. Didn't hear a single laugh within the 10 minutes I was there. It was actually kind of amazing. Speaking of a lack of laughs, while I do think the ET review over the credits was smart, really gives people a reason to stick around for the entire thing and even watch the credits, it's kind of a lackluster episode of The Angry Video Game Nerd. What's especially awkward about it is this ending scene was uploaded as an official episode of The Angry Video Game Nerd after the movie got released, but they cut the music from the credits, so we're left with grasshoppers in the background. Literally grasshopper chirping as the nerd is making jokes about this game. They even had the audience laugh at the first joke he makes, but after that, pure silence for the rest of the review. This video is an anti-laugh track.
Why does E.T. need so much privacy? Does he need to tug on his little green beam or something?
So yeah, all in all, I don't think it's a very good movie, but I do think there are things to appreciate about it. I think maybe the script just needed a little work. Like, the plot is fine, it's just the dialogue it's atrocious, I'm sorry. The most extreme thing you can imagine a character saying isn't always the funniest. Still, I'd say it's overhated. It gets things right. It's far from the worst YouTuber movie I've seen. Just real quick, I'm going to be as upfront about this as possible. I've always had a hard time with anime. I mean, in terms of doing videos on it, if I show footage, it always gets taken down. So unfortunately with this one and any future anime films, I'm gonna have to mainly rely on pictures. It sucks, it shouldn't be that way, but I just have too many bad experiences. This isn't a fear of the video getting demonetized or anything, it's more so just a fear of the video not being able to go up, period. I'll show a few clips when I think it's necessary, but yeah, mainly pictures, I'm sorry. Pokemon the first movie is a perfect adaptation of the source material, but a really ridiculous movie for anyone who didn't understand the appeal of Pokemon. Mostly people who were already grown up by the time it first came out. It's a movie with an anti-fighting message, which is a strange choice for a Pokemon movie to make. There's a scene where a bunch of kids jump into the ocean during a deadly storm, and this is seen as a good thing. They kill off Ash and bring him back to life with tears. It's kind of nonsense. That 16% makes sense if you were a critic with zero investment with Pokemon and was just doing their job. As someone who liked Pokemon growing up, it's pretty easy to forgive the absurdity of it all. I mean, from the very first episode, you accept kids leave home when they're 10 and it just works out all the time. You can suspend your disbelief with shit like the kids traveling by sea during a storm just fine at this point. The anti-fighting message is kind of funny, but like, I get it. For Pokemon to work as a series, it has to be established that most Pokemon enjoy fighting with a trainer. They enjoy doing it for sport, with the difference in the movie is they are fighting to kill. It doesn't have to consider real-world logic because there's nothing even remotely real about it. I always thought it'd be better if the series just didn't focus on the morality of Pokemon fights since it kind of kills the fantasy a little bit, but looking back at the movie, it's really just here as a motive for Mewtwo, who is a really cool and fun antagonist. He's essentially the selling point of this movie. The movie really does get a lot right in terms of adapting the show into something more grand. The animation gets a pretty big step up from the show, still looking pretty fantastic even to this day. At the time, this was potentially the best Pokemon-related animation we had, unless there's something more obscure out there that I haven't heard of. The show had its charm, but I did rewatch a a lot of the old episodes I grew up with a few years ago, and yeah, they clearly cut a lot of corners during the old days. There is a ton of reuse in animation, kind of a surprising amount for such a massive series, but of course it wasn't that popular day one. Or at least it wasn't that popular before they even released the damn thing. They created a lot of shots that could essentially be recycled in every episode. The movie not only looks great, but it really takes advantage of the higher animation budget scene-wise, opening with Mewtwo immediately showing off his excellent design and immediately giving us some action with his character. This scene is followed by a Pokemon battle between Ash and another trainer. This is cool because now we get to see the characters we're actually familiar with, given more frames and cleaner animation as a whole. I really love these two opening scenes. On top of looking great, they're just a great way to set up the story. Again, Mewtwo is the selling point of this movie, so they were sure to include him at the very start. He disappears for a while after that opening scene, but you're okay with it because now you're back to the characters you watched the show for. I know originally Mewtwo's opening scene was a lot longer, and future releases of this movie actually do include the extended version, but I have to say as a kid, if the Mewtwo stuff went on as long as it did in these extended cuts, I probably would have lost interest before making it to Ash. I think they struck a perfect balance here. From there, the movie continues making choices that I think make for a pretty fun experience. With there being multiple trainers in this movie, they're able to show off a lot of different Pokemon. Feels like a majority of the Gen 1 favorites made some sort of appearance. They managed to give Team Rocket a good role in the movie, starting off as antagonists but very quickly being overshadowed by the main threat. It's actually kind of funny seeing Meowth be a voice of reason as all this chaos is going down. I think the film's score is memorable, the songs are corny, but I love them. The fight scenes look great, especially the ones between Mew and Mewtwo. They even managed to throw in nods to stuff like, who's that Pokemon? Again, this movie is kind of nonsense if you aren't into the series, more so than most of the film adaptations I've been talking about, but it really does go all out in trying to capture different aspects of the show. It has a nice callback to the first episode in the final scene. It has a lot of really nice moments like these. It's probably not going to be at the very top of my rankings list, hell, I'd expect it to be closer to the bottom of the list, but for what its goals are when creating a cinematic experience for fans of the series, I think they really knocked it out of the park on their first go. I'll likely talk about the second and third movie at some point too. After the third movie is when I kind of dropped out of Pokemon, so I don't know if I'd continue these after the third one, but we'll see.
Hey everyone, I'm Chris, also known as Retro Gaming Nerd from the channel Smash Pack. Spiny and or Michael said that he wanted to do the Pokemon movie, I definitely had to jump in on this one. So today I wanted to talk about the prologue of this movie, or the lack thereof one technically in the American version. With that being said, the prologue explains Mewtwo's backstory, which most Americans didn't get until the DVD release of Mewtwo's Return. The prologue was the story of Mewtwo's creation, where Mewtwo and a handful of other clones are made, including the clones of the first starters of the Pokemon series and a little girl. But the other clones pass away where Mewtwo survives. The starters do show up again in the movie, but the little girl doesn't, obviously. It was based on a Japanese radio drama called The Birth of Mewtwo, and it was cut from the American dub for two major reasons: pacing and to suit the narrative. The prologue added 20 extra minutes focusing on Mewtwo and had no real Pikachu in it, which was definitely a problem for kids back in the day. Like, let's be real here, if you watch the beginning of this movie, you were expecting to see Pikachu and Ash, but like, 20 minutes is a lot for a kid back in the day. And the other reason is they wanted to villainize Mewtwo more. They didn't want to confuse or bore kids, so they cut it out of the American release. With that being said though, there are multiple differences outside of that from the Japanese and American release. But to me this feels like this is the most important thing, even though I'm definitely not the first person to bring this up. Anyways, this movie definitely holds up, and there's no real wrong way to watch this movie. In my opinion, the first three Pokemon movies hold up really well, but I'll talk about those if Spiny ever wants me to come back, or if he ever covers the other two. Especially since there is other things that I want to say about them. With that being said, the movies do feel like a series within themselves, and all in all, I think that this movie still is good. I'm bad at outros, I'm sorry. I don't know where to go by.
So as I said at the start of the video, I really loved Venture Bros start to finish. I think that it is a fantastic show, and you better believe my hype for the movie was real. You know, the hype of finishing the show, make it to the movie. When I started watching the show, everything was out there. Fucking 20-year run, and it has 7 seasons in a movie. I cannot imagine what being a fan of the show in real time was like. I thought the show was so good that the Venture Bros movie could possibly be the one that dethroned South Park in the #1 spot on my list. Like, it just had so much potential. I like these characters so much. And from what everyone told me, the show stayed good until the very end. So what did I think about Venture Bros Radiant is the Blood of a Baboon Heart? Well, just because I'm disappointed doesn't mean it's bad. Okay, the circumstances surrounding this movie are pretty unfair. I mean, a season 8 was in development when out of nowhere it got the can. Really love what you've been up to, Warner Brothers. It's just one amazing decision after the other with you. So the Venture Bros movie feels less like a movie and more of a rushed season 8. There are a lot of story elements that would have clearly gotten more time if there was another 10 episodes rather than just a movie that's just under an hour and a half. For what it is, I think they did about as good as anyone could. I mean, there are a lot of characters to wrap up in this movie. It didn't really get a chance to be a proper film. They ended the series with a massive cliffhanger, so they had to follow up that with significantly less time than they intended. There isn't just one big plot this movie has going for it. There's a bunch of mini plots that are really trying hard to connect with one another, but I mean, season 7 just did not leave us in movie territory. So much shit happened that they couldn't just ignore it to make the movie flow better. They had to give answers to what they set up. It's unfortunate, but making this movie work was not going to be an easy task. So with that in mind, I do like the movie. A lot, actually. It's very high up in my ranking because it's still Venture Bros and it's still really well written and thoughtful. It's just, I have such high standards for the show and they clearly had to rush this ending. It happens to the best of them. Moral Oral is another favorite from Adult Swim of mine, and that show got the same treatment, except they at least got an entire season to wrap things up. Although they were potentially cancelled in the middle of the airing of that season, I don't know too much about the history. Still, they had multiple episodes rather than just a movie. Some of the film's arcs are really solid, while others just feel like, well, we have all these main characters, we might as well do something with them. In my opinion, Hank, Dean, Dr. Orpheus, Jefferson, the Monarch, and Henchman 21 get everything they needed out of this film. Their scenes are easily the best parts. Dr. Venture, Quizboy, Pete White, and Sergeant Hatred have a decent arc, I guess, but it feels a little anticlimactic for their final role in the series. Dr. Venture's main story really does just feel like an average episode. The Guild of Calamitous Intent and Brock surprisingly really ended up pulling the short straw with this one. They do not get a lot of focus in this film at all. I guess I can see that with the Guild. I mean, it's a whole group of characters that would be eating up time from our main characters, but Brock, really? Arguably one of the most important characters on the show does almost nothing in the movie? And then there's two I'm just a little skeptical about, Dr. Mrs. the Monarch and the newcomer, Mantilla. I think Mantilla had potential to be a really good main antagonist, but with all of the build-up for her, it really just comes down to a single conversation between her and Dr. Mrs. the Monarch, God, I miss calling her Dr. Girlfriend, that ends the conflict really quickly. Mantilla has relevance to the movie and the background of the other characters, but she doesn't really get much time to shine, and Dr. Mrs. the Monarch kind of gets dragged into this story. They try something big with her in this movie, but they just don't have the time to justify it. I don't think her conflict is well explained at all, but she's still tied with like 4 other characters as my second favorite on the show. Dr. Orpheus is the best character, fight me. So of course I'm happy to see her in this movie. I'm happy that they do something with her. It just doesn't... There's just not enough time. That's it. There was just not enough time to do all these stories, and she's one of the characters who got the most screwed over by this. I do love her final interaction with the Monarch. I honestly think that scene is the best in the entire movie.
You are the Monarch. That Dr. Venture makes my skin crawl, and you make me feel like the luckiest person alive. You're not the same.
I feel like if they included Brock and Rusty and Dean's search for Hank, they could have had more screen time with a more endearing plot, but at the same time, that would feel kind of out of character, and would even potentially take away from Dean's redemption arc from the previous season. I think the fact that Dean was the only one willing to go out searching for Hank is very important for his character, so I'm just conflicted in the end. I can't think of a way they could have done this better. Okay, let's talk about where the movie really shines, because again, this is a good movie. It's just not a very well organized movie. As I said before, Dean and Hank's story is great. I love all of the scenes of Hank trying to find his mom. There's a great moment where he's back at the old Venture complex where we see so many callbacks to iconic moments and scenes play out all at once. I like him reuniting with his old buddy / half-brother Dermont. I like him so much that I mispronounced the fucking name. I like that they brought back J.K. Simmons' character, even if it was just for 2 short scenes. On Dean's side of the story, they found a way to bring Dr. Orpheus and Jefferson back. I was very happy to see this. Dr. Orpheus really does show up less and less as the show goes on, and I wasn't even really all that into his season 7 appearance. It kind of felt like they were getting ready to reintroduce him back into the show as a regular, and then they just don't. But the movie finally gives him some very satisfying scenes again, along with Jefferson, who's another character I really liked during my time with the show. I think the scene where Dr. Orpheus is telling Hank to leave his different personas in the past is honestly a very touching moment and probably my second favorite scene in the movie.
You will carry them inside you always, but their time has passed.
Both this scene and the scene with the Monarch and his wife feel very conclusive for these characters, in a story that isn't really meant to feel all that conclusive. You get the idea that not much has really been learned and things are going to just resume as normal the very next day, but it still kind of works. Dean continued this family's history of shitty behavior of what he did to Hank back in season 7, but his ability to take responsibility and risk his own life to save Hank, and Hank's ability to forgive Dean, to me, shows that these two are way better off than Rusty and their grandfather. The Venture family is becoming less monstrous with each generation. And with the Monarch's final scene, even though he's going back to Arch and Dr. Venture, it's done with a new lens, where even though the Monarch is still taking on the persona of a supervillain, he really is the better version of Rusty. What a fucking reveal to give within the show's last 5 minutes, but it works so well. I could honestly believe this was the plan from the very start of the show. It gives their rivalry so much more meaning, which is something I didn't even think I wanted. I don't need to know why the Monarch hates Dr. Venture so much. It's just this weird obsession he has, and I'm totally fine with that being the only context I get. But shit, they really made this reveal work in my opinion. Henchman 21 doesn't really get to go for much growth in this movie, but he didn't need it. Season 7 kinda gave us that in the finale, but it's still fun to have him tagging along. I was so bummed when they killed off 24, and I was not expecting that to be a permanent choice, but I really love the bond it built between the Monarch and 21. I was completely fine with seeing more of the same with their dynamic. It's always a lot of fun. In terms of upping the production from the show, I mean, it's about on par with the last few seasons, but the last few seasons were exceptionally well made. I mean, I think the early seasons were too, but they were a lot more cartoonish, and I think that style served the early seasons really well, where the more detailed animation served the newer seasons well, with the tone of the show getting darker as it went on. So I guess what I'm saying is the movie didn't really need to up the scale. Like with Breaking Bad, it's already a pretty cinematic series. There's definitely some standout moments with the animation in this movie. My favorite scene visually being Mantilla's introduction. Everything from the lighting, the tone, the music made for this really unsettling but also badass scene. I was really looking forward to see where they were going with this character, and even though I do think it kind of ended before it was really able to get started, there is still some good to what this did for the characters. There's a great moment during her conversation with Dr. and Mrs. the Monarch where she tells her that she could be doing so much better without the Monarch dragging her down, but to her the Monarch isn't doing that at all. She's made a good life for herself and she's able to do stuff with the guild while still supporting her husband with this crazy hatred he has towards Rusty, and she doesn't regret any of it. She has a pretty nice parallel to Brock, who is also looked down at by others for his connection to the Venture family, and how he actually enjoys being their bodyguard. In this movie and throughout the entire show, he's seen as too good for them. He is capable of doing so much more than defending someone who's just seen as a piece of shit by everyone, and even rightfully so at that. But he has a connection with Rusty and the boys, and he stands by his choices. Even though I don't love how these two characters were treated in this finale, they still managed to get great moments in. Honestly, her first scene with the Monarch in 21 is hilarious. That shit made me laugh. The movie isn't perfect, but it still left me satisfied with the show and where we're leaving the characters. Sure, there's some characters I would have liked to see more of, but if I'm being honest, I feel like we already got all the development we were going to get out of characters like Brock, 21, or Rusty. They're not going to redeem Rusty fully, that was never an option. His actions are too heinous. So I think just learning that he definitely 100% loves his two sons is kind of a nice little thing to throw in for him at the end. Even if as a whole we can't leave this show with a different lens for him, he's gonna be the same person forever. I enjoyed seeing Brock in the later episodes, but to this day I think the season 4 finale, Operation Prom, concludes his character pretty well. I felt like I knew everything I needed to know about the guy after that episode. It loses points for being all over the place, but it's still a fucking Venture Bros movie, and the fact that it could maintain the same quality of writing the show did puts it pretty damn high up on my list. Speaking of which, let's get to the rankins, a segment that's going to be a bigger bitch to edit with every installment. Hey, it's the Drawn Together movie, I see you haven't moved up at all. Impractical Jokers the movie, The Angry Video Game Nerd movie, Mystery Science 3000 the movie, I Am So Sorry, Blue Mountain State The Rise of Thadland, Pokemon the first movie, Beavis and Butthead Do America, El Camino a Breaking Bad movie, Regular Show the movie, The Simpsons movie, The Bob's Burgers movie, The Venture Bros, Radiant is the Blood of the Baboon Heart, Invader Zim Enter the Florpus, Steven Universe the movie, The SpongeBob SquarePants movie, South Park Bigger, Longer, Uncut. Not today, South Park. Warner Brothers saved your ass. Maybe one day, though.